Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where frontline sales leaders teach you how to build and scale an outbound sales team.
And welcome to another episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm here today with Patrick E. McLean of fame and fortune, well, maybe at least the fame part, hopefully the fortune part, the man behind Kill a Word. And if you haven't heard of that, I'll tell you about it. So that's how I found you, Patrick. Well, welcome here. Nice to meet you.
Nice to be with you today.
Yeah. I guess we've already met, but for other people. So Patrick E. McLean, I say that because that's the site, patrickemclean.com.
Yeah.
So I found you. I actually looked it up when we were talking before this 4 years ago, I think 2014. And there's this thing called Kill a Word.
Yeah, how to kill a word.
How to kill a word. And it was this great slideshow deck around showing people how to take all this text, and here's like a typical paragraph, and just chop it into pieces. So you'd have, 50 words in the paragraph, and he just like chops it down until there's 4 words left. And it just still shares the essence of the intention of the paragraph. So you can actually Google it. We'll put the link in the show notes, but if you Google how to kill a word, especially SlideShare.
Yeah. And I've got it on my site.
And we'll give you the site, right? Even better. So I love this. And we actually still share it with clients because even in the world of outbound prospecting, but this is true whether it's a marketing report, white paper, cold email, everyone's attention is scarce. And the more that you can condense your message to be the essence, the easier it will be for people to get it and get interested. So I love How to Kill a Word. I was always a fan. I finally looked you up. I'm like, we got to do something, right? Let's at least get you on the podcast, as well as hopefully how you're going to do a training and even of our team on the outbound team front and how we work with clients and our messaging. So would love to hear a bit more about what you do. Maybe you can tell us, Patrick, what you do, how you help companies how to kill words.
Well, I help companies communicate more powerfully and more perhaps humanely. And that started in advertising and has moved to marketing strategy, branding, and everything, and also helping executives improve their writing. So I guess I can explain how that all came to be. But, everything from proposals to presentations to high stakes stuff like that. I'm just an advertising creative guy, and I got very sick of the business. I like to describe myself as a recovering creative director. And I went through, I think you wrote about this in one of your books too. You went through a period of searching where you're like, well, what I was doing before doesn't really work. What do I do now? And maybe this is all I know how to do. And I started looking at what I had that might be of value and trying to figure out, what's sort of the problem, what's missing in business. And I think I figured out the problem a little bit before everyone realized it was a problem. But because I have written so much and rewritten things so much, I started asking myself the question of, it's not, what's a good way to write? It's why is everyone writing so badly? I mean, the weird question is when I look at the mistakes that people make when they try and communicate, not just in writing, if you want to be, like a grammarian or you want to be a critic, then you feel good about finding ways that people make mistakes. But if you actually want to help somebody, you have to go, well, they think that's a good idea to do. Why do they think that's a good thing to do? And the mistakes that I see are the things that take too long. I'm like, why would anybody think
There's too much blah, blah, blah.
Why would anybody use the language like that? At the same time, and it's only gotten worse. We're literally the most messaged humans in the history of the world.
Until tomorrow.
Yeah.
And there's more tomorrow and the next year.
Right. And there's no end of something vying for your attention. I put my phone away. It's on the other side of the table, but that could go off. I could have any number of chat windows, ring. So the problem is if you're trying to get through to somebody with any sort of communication, there's always something to distract them. So just on the basis of the length of it, the longer you go, the more likely it is something else is going to happen.
Yep, true. And that's hence why, for example, even in predictable revenue, but the short and sweet email works better almost always than the long and wordy one.
And
just the fact that it's shorter and sweeter alone is a huge advantage. Easier.
yes. And then the other thing that's great about the way you approach emails is the tone. Hey, are you the right person for this? It's not people have anxiety when they go to, everybody does, I suppose, especially if you sell yourself, that I want to give you everything. Maybe you don't need everything, right up front.
Let me see if I can do, hopefully this will work over the audio. I'll read an example, right, of the kiloword approach. In fact, let's just keep our fingers crossed that for the video participants that this screen share will work.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to read a paragraph and then I'll reread the killed version, right? So it's a sad fact of modern existence that nobody has enough attention. In fact, some thought leaders are referring to this as the age of distraction. Okay. Now, version 2, I'm going to skip ahead a bit. If you killed all the words you could, as Patrick said, you could boil this down to the phrase, nobody has enough attention. Okay, we went from about 20 words to 4 while maintaining the essence of the message. And this principle alone can rewrite or redesign how you do case studies, white papers, cold emails, even call scripts, all the marketing content you do, all the outbound sales content you do, right? That's why it's so vital, like the skill of how to kill a word, right? Whether you're in marketing or in sales. Doing a proposal, writing an email, white paper. How do you get rid of all those extra words? By the way, I use your approach when I do, writing an update to the From Impossible book, right? And my co-CEO at Predictable Revenue, Colin, who normally hosts these, did a guest, like a guest chapter. And then I went through and edited it. And he said it was really interesting through the revisions. He could see how I went through and just killed all the words. Right, that's our phrase we use. Taking something that was 1,500 words and reducing it to 1,000, and not only not losing the essence, but making it much more readable and interesting because you're getting rid of the fluff.
It's making it powerful,
right. The exposing the essence.
Yeah, and the advice that everybody gives you is to think about the reader. Well, no matter who your audience is, right? The kindest thing you can do is not waste their time. And
how do you?
2 examples too is that the first one, the longer one about calling this the age of distraction, that's well written from a grammatical standpoint. You can't say there's anything wrong with that.
Correct.
It's styled well. It just doesn't get to the point fast enough. Anyway, so
it's like what you learn in school, it's grammatically correct, but what you learn in business is that doesn't matter. What's going to get you a result?
Yeah.
It's not always what either is grammatically correct or, it's the reverse, because in school you're supposed to learn how to get to 500 words. Now we're trying to get under 50 words or under 500 words. It's the opposite what you learn in school.
You should get more points if you can do it in less.
Yeah. So how about, what are some of like the tactics tip? Like, how do I do that? First of all, there's the example you could see on the site, which we'll get to, but what are some of the lessons you teach on how to do this?
Okay. Some of the simplest ways to do this. One, you have to adopt a draft structure, even if you're writing something very short, right? So if you write an email, I do this all the time. I'll write an email, I'll leave the window open, I'll go do something else and come back to it. That's because when you write it, your brain goes through a process and then your subconscious will process it and then you can come back and you can say it shorter almost every time. Second tip.
So in other words, when you say a draft process, you draft it, you take a break and come back to it.
Yep. And it's surprising how many people think that you could write something and just bang it out and it would be good. No one does that ever. I've talked to all kinds of professional writers in all kinds of disciplines and no one ever has that happen. The second thing is you can generally speaking, if you take the last sentence of something you wrote and you make it the first sentence, it will immediately get shorter and better. Because what we do is we try and write something is we're figuring out the logical steps along the way. And a lot of the time, nobody needs the logical steps. They just need the thing. Do you know what I mean? If you move the point of it up front. And there's an example that I use for this. Those curtains you just put up in your house? Mm-hmm. Well, they're on on fire, and so's the rest of the building. If anybody did that, you would know there was something wrong with their brain. But we do it all the time in proposals, in emails and reports. And I was training a bunch of people at this agency, and one of the things for their new media people was a recommendation for how their client was supposed to use, I think it was Twitter. But it started off with literally, Twitter is a short messaging service that started in 2000 and blah, 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 blah. And nobody needs it in that order. I mean, you have to justify it, I suppose. But from my way of thinking, it's, hey, here's how you should use Twitter. And then in the rest of it and the appendix, and here's why, and here's the plan. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Is people don't always need the steps from where you are to the thing. Sometimes they just need the thing.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, just be trying to be really aware of like how much they really, if you're trying to get people from point A to point B, they probably need less than you think.
Yeah.
Right. Because, for example, if I'm sending a cold email, if I start with the first sentence is, hey, are you free on next Tuesday for a demo? That actually could work. I don't know. Or sometimes I might need to add a little extra of the context before I ask for that thing. But I guess the other word is, what would if I'm sending it to a person, like the thing that they would want would be what? I mean, they may not want a demo. Anyway, it's just like a good thought process to really be, I think, conscious and intentional about how you write your email or your piece. I also really like that idea that you take the last thing you write, what should that be the first, those last areas. If you're getting to sort of like the main point, maybe you should just move that up to the top somehow, kind of like journalist style.
Yeah, inverted pyramid for a whole bunch of reasons. The other thing you can do is any adjective, adverb, you can just cross it out, adjective.
Really?
You just cross
really?
It out. It works. Really? Yeah.
Really?
I once told a guy I was coaching.
Totally.
I said, essentially, it means you can never use the word essentially ever again. And I'd like to draw a distinction between doing this in speech and doing this in the written form. Because in speech, an a pause, an essentially, the fact that, those things, they give a conversation a rhythm so you can gather your thoughts. And so other people can process what you said. In writing, that's not quite so good. It makes it harder to get the point across. But here's you sort of brought up something about context, which is how do I ground myself and what's the most important thing that's going on here? And that's baked into every level of the language, and I don't know why. Also, the way I got to this is I thought about how I learned to write, which was a bit unusual. And then I did some research on the way writing has been taught. And I don't know why it doesn't start with this, especially in English, which is that you have to start with the most important thing, because baked right into the language, all the way down to the sentence level, is an order, right? Subject, verb, object. We want the first thing to be the subject. So in a proposal, it has to be the overarching, quickly reason why you want to do this. Not even an argument for it.
You just said quickly. See, I guess speech adverbs are okay. Oh, you got an exit. Yeah.
I'm not writing.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
But I'll edit it out of the transcript. That's for sure. But so
I start with the most important thing. Yep.
Right. So what is, and in my mind, that always, for anything for business, that boils down to, it has to be a point about how it's going to increase revenue or lower costs.
Well, here's I'll give you an example too. In the easiest one, I think, is in demos, software or SaaS demos. I think classically people start with, here's how you log in, here's how you use the interface, here's how you log a call, or here's how you push a button. And at the end they get to, here's how the reports show up. Where for most users, and there are exceptions because you got to know who you're talking to, you got to start reverse, which is here's where the dashboard and metrics, let's show those first, right? Because any kind of like manager or leader, that's what they care about. And then go back to if they have a question on how you got there, but they don't need to see all the how you got there. They just want to see what's my metric, what's the dashboard, what can I measure?
What am I going to get out of this thing?
What do I get?
The problem is that as things get increasingly technical, like if my job is to run a process, or maybe to sell a technical machine, or to be an engineer for this thing, by nature, I'm very interested in that stuff because that's what I deal with all day long. Even if we use a simple analogy of the factory, if you're selling a machine for a production line, nobody actually cares about the stats of the machine. What they care about is what's going to be the result down at the end of the production line. What am I going to get from this thing if I get this software as a service? Like you used to, that means that you have trouble appointment again. I don't care how it works.
And here's where I think this idea of nailing a niche or a niche, in Canada's niche, US niche, is so important, because when you talk about a result, and you mentioned, make money, get more revenue, less costs, or reduce risk. What we were looking at, what works here, is that what's the version of the result that that person cares about? Because if you're selling a machine to a line manager, like the more revenue is kind of there, but there's an interim result, which is if I know I can generate double the production, then there'll be more revenue. So it's like, what's the first order result I want, and what's the second order result that's also valuable. So it's like knowing the customer, so which version of the result is what they actually care about.
That's an important thing to point out about case studies too, because it can't just be so I like to think of a case study as a specific kind of story, and there's a result for the business, but the case study also has to have the result for the person who bought the thing, right? So if you go through the cycle, like I'm going to do this and it's going to be good for the business and it's going to be good for my career. When you can get both of those things, then you really have a great case.
Yep. Hey, let's talk about case studies, because this is an area of you focus on. Maybe just revisit. You see someone comes to you, they want a case study rewritten. A couple of problems you tend to see beyond what we've already talked about, right? They probably have things in the wrong order, a lot of vague language, and then how do you approach redoing the case study?
I use a really simple model, and I don't know anybody who's familiar with like a traditional agency world of years ago. They have these complicated things, creative briefs or brand briefs, but I've distilled it down into three things, which is you've got an audience, a message, and an action, right? So for every audience that your case study is written to an audience, and maybe several audiences, but you want them to do something. So the first thing that really sharpens up anybody's offering like that is, what do you want them to do? What do you want them to think differently about? Do you want them to contact you? Do you want them to be informed? Is this something they're going to use to take?
The call to action.
Yeah, and in every way that's going to be used. And then you have to, there's a lot of information that, like this is the easiest thing to fix. People put information in a case study because I feel like I have to prove myself or prove my business or prove this thing or prove it will start off with XYZ Corporation is a thing in the field of this and that and the other thing, and we've done this and its solution. It has to be right on the benefit, that message that is going to get the person to take action. They need to get that right from the very beginning. Depending on different audiences, they like more or less detail, but I think it should be structured in a way that allows people to get the benefit of it immediately, and also to see a human being in the case. So many cases are about abstract, got a result in a quarter.
Right. You're sort of following the steps of one person in a way. So I know stories are, you're a big believer in stories, and storytelling is part of this.
Well, it's because stories are how we're wired to understand meaning. It's very difficult to understand data. You need specialized tools, you need discipline, but if I want to think about with kids, right? I don't present a technical argument to my son about why he shouldn't lie. I can tell him a story. I tell him a story about what happens when you lie. The boy who cried wolf. It's how we really are wired to learn from each other and decide what's meaningful and important. Now, that you have to have a result and you have to have data, but You can't ignore the fact. And it can be very simple. It can be very short. It doesn't have to be, like a once upon a time kind of story. This guy started here, and then you talk about all the challenges. It's like I looked at the Ruben Schwartz. I don't know how to pronounce that, but the proposal thing. He wrote a blog post for you guys, and and it's in a story. It's not a person's story, but this company has achieved some kind of success, but now has some problem as a result of the growth, success, innovation. Problem means that this is like, so you've got you start to have the bones of a story, and I think if you can get a person in there, it's even better.
Yep. Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to do a quick review. So in terms of a case study, for example, there's 3 elements, who's the audience, what's the action you want them to take, and that message, or you said audience, message, and action, right? 3 key elements. And I really liked your point of, let's call it following a person through the story, right? Not making it so abstract that, Caterpillar did this, and Caterpillar, it's really, hey, Bob or Jane at X had this personal issue and did this personal thing. Some more concrete details around a person.
So I've been helping a company that produces assessments for use in companies, and that all of that HR kind of speak can be very fluffy. And if you boil it down to, you have low employee engagement when somebody has a bad manager, or a manager who doesn't know how to do certain things, right? The people's satisfaction with their job comes down to their satisfaction with their manager. And then you can talk about the behavior in a manager and the behavior in a person, and you can talk about the assessment, and you can talk about how that would change or could change. Then you have a really grounded way to talk about this very technical psychological stuff.
Okay. Anything else on the case study front you think that when you look at them, sort of that process?
Well,
does length matter? So I know that you mentioned the person. I know that sometimes the stage of their buying cycle, because if in early stages they just want a little bit, as they get sort of later into more closer to buying something, they might want more detailed. They need more information. But on the case study front, it's usually earlier. I will just remind people that case studies are one of the best ways to market yourself, or tools, whether it's through just like marketing or through outbound prospecting using case studies. They really are essential, and the payback on a good one is high. It's hard to write a good one. There are a lot of challenges there because, again, if customers even let you share details, a lot of customers, they don't really know the great useful details. They might not have tracked things. So it takes work. It's harder than people realize to get great case studies, but they are really worth a lot and worth taking the time to invest in getting them and to getting it right.
Yeah. There's 2 things. One, I think the goal, because it's so easy to communicate now, like we're doing, the goal is to get somebody into a conversation as quickly as possible. And the second thing is, a great case study isn't, you can't just take any case and make it a great case study. And I actually have learned this working with one of my clients for a long time. I think, and it's the way I've structured that offering the way I have, is you need to be continually gathering case studies and building a feedback loop of what's going on. So even if it's just a page or a Google Doc that has a bunch of case studies, and then you take the best ones of those, and then you try and turn them into a more produced version. So what I see is that if an organization doesn't have the discipline, you don't necessarily need anybody outside to do it. But if the organization doesn't have the discipline of constantly gathering those and saying, what's really going on here? I think it makes it much harder to get to those great case studies.
Yep. It takes work. It's one of the things we see a lot of our clients come in to, they want to do outbound prospecting. They don't have, a lot have case studies, but they're not well written for outbound, and a lot don't have them. So I think one important point is that we'll see someone had written a case study that was used for marketing, and we call it, it's not outbound ready, right? It basically has to be, go through the killer word process, yes, everything you're talking about here, to make it short and sweet enough and outbound ready so that someone who doesn't know you will look at it. Because if they don't know you, they're not going to read some blah, 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 like long case study that has vague metric or vague or no metrics. And it's in a PDF, right? That's another problem.
Yeah. So I'm going to push you a little bit there, because is it, if it really is that wordy, is it a good case study for marketing?
No. It shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be that way in the first place.
Yeah.
But rather than saying, hey, your case study is not, those case studies you've done are poorly written. So, hey, let's just make them outbound ready.
Yeah. That's a better thing to do.
Yeah.
It's like there's a shift. You think that like the future and the past don't coincide in the same moment, but they do all the time everywhere. It's who is it who said the future is not evenly distributed? But there's this whole approach to marketing that I suppose that I grew up in, and then I realized it doesn't quite work that way anymore, which is kind of how I've evolved into what useful tools, can you give people, and how can you make this thing work better as a process, and just the lack of attention that people have. Like, it used to be the case that my job was to be very clever to stop someone in a stream of content that they would walk away from, but they didn't have enough. You couldn't change the channel, right? You make a TV ad and you just interrupt somebody with something interesting. Now you just have to be really clear. And it doesn't mean that it has to be boring or it can't be interesting, fun or whatever. It just has to be quick.
And to the point, and that does take work. We I don't know if it was Mark Twain or not, but there's this old quote that gets mangled. I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have enough time.
Yeah, it was. It's attributed most often to Blaise Pascal. I'm sorry,
somebody.
Yeah, but it's not even him. Nobody really knows where it came.
Yeah, exactly. It takes, and it's interesting. I would say the thing that made predictable revenue, a popular book was, the book. When I left Salesforce in 2006, if I had written a sales book then, it would have been very different, right? More of like a classic sales book. But over a few years and working with clients and so on, I was able to distill to experience like what the key elements were.
Right.
And it took me a while, but sort of, the whole predictable revenue idea or the books, it's like, how do I distill it down to like these few key ideas? It's hard. I mean, it is hard.
Yeah. It's the same thing. Yeah. I've gone through the same thing so I had the How to Kill a Word thing. It grew out of a thing called Good Words, Right Order, which is a training class that I did and coaching. And worked with Amazon a little bit on that. Writing is hugely important there. And it slowly, and I thought I was doing two different things when I would go do some, sort of marketing thing over here and I would do the training thing. It's the same thing. It's all the same challenge. And you got to be really quick. And to give you an example of, it's taken me a long time to do this, but these principles apply to, say, movies too, right? Or if you think about, if you don't know what the thing is about in the very beginning of the movie and you don't know why you should care about the character, like every movie you love, usually it's a secondary character. Not always, but they say the theme of the movie out loud right in the beginning. And if you miss that, you don't know what the theme is, the movie doesn't really work as well. If you don't know what the character wants. And they're conventions in stories, but it's exactly the same as, I got to know what the subject is. I got to know what the stakes are. I got to know why I care.
Mm-hmm.
You need it
get people bought in.
And that's what gets you to buy in.
Yep. Well, speaking of that, so I know that you work with companies to help them, especially on improve case studies.
Yep.
What are some of the ways you work with companies and people?
So I do some messaging and some creative still. I coach individuals. I do something called co-writing, which is the way that I help people either get their content done or get better at writing. And then I do some training, like webinars and on-site, training to try and transfer this skill. Because the problem is everybody essentially is a salesperson or a marketer, is a content marketer at the very least, because the burden is on everybody to be able to communicate well. And then, I think that's it. Let me check my little list. And then helping people fix their websites from a messaging and a content standpoint.
Yep. So in some of those areas, it's helping people get better results on either in lead gen or in sales. So I know case studies, websites, we're having you do some training for some of our people. And best place, so Patrick with a C, right? Patrick
E. McLean, MCLEAN.com.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Patrick E. McLean. But if that doesn't work, and on there's a link to the killer word, the slideshow. That was so cool.
There's a couple of links. I'll make a nice big logo on the front page. But there's that ebook there, and I've also put together a course, which is this 5 video course that you each day for 5 days you get like a 7 to 10 minute video that talks about some of these, a lot of the concepts that we've talked about.
Yeah, but I just searched for your name and intentionally misspelled it, and it still came up. So Patrick E. McLean should work.
Oh,
all right. Well, Patrick, hey, I want to say thank you very much for coming on. Again, I've always been a fan of the kill word approach. I use it all the time, and we tell clients about it. So it's great to finally meet you in person here and to share some of your advice with people. It's just to wrap up some of the tips that I really liked you mentioned were when you're writing something like that draft method, which is you draft it, take a break, come back. Don't feel like you need to give everyone all the steps to get to the thing. Sometimes they just need the thing. And another version of that is oftentimes that last thing you write might be the thing, maybe the thing you start with.
And the other way to think about that too is if you should always go under the assumption that they would say yes, right? So if you just tell them what it is, or what you're offering, they might just say yes, and then you haven't wasted their time. But even if you say, I can save you, Aaron, I can save you $1 million in cost every year. Even if you don't believe it, if the explanation that comes right after it is good, then you're hooked.
It just has to be intriguing.
Yeah. So sometimes, and maybe the $1 million is sort of an oversell, but if you put it up right up front, the person can just be like, oh yes, of course. And everybody moves on with their life.
Yep. And the last tips on, for example, case studies, 3 aspects: audience, message, and action method to take. Plus try to follow a person through the case study as a story to make it have those details that makes it easier to resonate with something. When a reader sees themselves in the story, they connect with it more. That's one way to do it. So, all right. Again, thanks very much, Patrick. PatrickEMcLean.com. And really appreciate it. Learned some things today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And man, you set it up beautifully. We got to boil it down to the essence.
To the essence.